Hey Cheva, what's happening? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Ches, that's Daf 68 of Masechta Ayruvin. It's a good Daf, Cheva, it's a good Daf. We start off talking about Amira La'akum, when it's a Shivus, when it's in Dinder Abanan, and it's in a place of a mitzvah. Talk about Breira when it comes to an Eruv. Remember Breira, about retroactively the photoshopping, because it can be Mevatel from one rishus to another rishus, or from a hatzer to hatzer. This has come up a few times, and also interestingly, the concept of Mevatlin v'chozun u'Mevatlin. Can I be Mevatel my rishus to you, and then you be Mevatel it back to me? So these are the sugyas that the Gemara is. What's the Gemara doing? The Gemara is, exploring Lamaisa on Daf Samach Ches of Masechta Ayruvin. We will begin on the last thin line of Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. How Yenuka de Ishtapich Chamime. So there was a little guy, and his hot water spilled out. What does that mean? There was a baby, 8-year-old baby boy, and we had to give him a bris, and it is Shabbos. Now, the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, that of course we learned, said that we bathe the baby in warm water before and after the bris. And the assumption was that that was really important because for medical reasons. And therefore, if the hot water spilled out and we couldn't bathe the baby, well, that is a problem. It doesn't say explicitly if that means that we wouldn't do the bris or not, but it's a big deal. And also, of course, we want to do the bris on time. We want to do it that day on Shabbos. So we're trying to figure out, is there a way that we can get hot water for this baby? So, how Yenuka de Ishtapich Chamime. So there was a little guy, and we had some hot water for him, but it spilled out. And it was Shabbos, and we had to give him a bris. Amrlu Rabba. So Rabba said, I know what. Nesu lechamime migo beisoi. Well, I have hot water. Lemaise chevre. I needed hot water yesterday. I needed hot water. I guess I'm telling you technically when I'm recording this, but alright, lemaise, yesterday it was Yontif over here, / Shabbos, and I needed hot water because I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow we didn't have hot water, and I was walking around town looking for hot water because you know me, I need my coffee. So I was surprised at how many people didn't have hot water. Yeah, anyways, chevre, let's go weiter. So Rabba says, I know what, I have hot water in my house. Now Rabba lived in the same hatzer as this baby, so Rabba just said, I'll go to my house and bring some hot water to the other house in the hatzer, and problem solved, right? So Amalei Abaye says to Rabba, V'halo avinon. Abaye says, yeah, but we didn't make an Eruv. Amalei, okay, beseder, no big deal, nismach hashituf. Rabba says, okay, so we'll just rely on the shituf from Avos. Of course we did a shituf from Avos, right? Amalei halo shatfinon. Abaye says, no, we didn't do a shituf from Avos. Okay, so Rabba says, don't worry. Neimule lenachri, leisile. So Rabba says, okay, we'll find a non-Jew and we'll ask him if he can do us a favor and bring the water from my house to the house of the baby. Now, Amar Abaye said, Ba'oi le'osve lemar, I wanted to ask a kasha to Rabba. Now, of course, Rabba was one of Abaye's rebbeim. So Abaye is saying he really wanted to ask Rabba a kasha. V'lo shavkun Rav Yosef, but Rav Yosef wouldn't allow Abaye to ask Rabba a kasha. The Amar of Yosef, Amar of Kahana, that Rav Yosef said the name of Kahana, Ki Avinan be Rav Yehuda, when we were by the Bismedrish of Rav Yehuda, Hava Amarlan, he would tell us, B'doraisa, when it comes to Isurim B'doraisa, Mosvinan Tuvda V'hadar Abdinan Maisa, first we'll ask the Kasha and then we'll do we'll do the Maisa before, first we ask the Kasha before doing the Maisa. B'dorabanon, when it comes to Rabbanos, Abdinan Maisa V'hadar Mosvinan Tuvda, first we'll do the thing and then we'll ask the questions. Meaning, if you have a situation like this, where a teacher says that something is permitted, like this, where Rabba said, no big deal, we'll just ask the non-Jew to bring the water for us. So if you have a situation where the teacher says that something is okay, and you have a student, like Abaye over here, who has a question, so it depends. If it's a din de oraisa, right, that the student has a question, and like maybe this is not permitted, well then he should first ask the question before allowing the teacher to say that this thing is permitted. But if it's a din de rabbanan, like over here, we're talking about an eruv after all, which is the assumption is din de rabbanan. So we say what? We say, wait, don't ask your question. First let this thing happen and ask your question later. And for that reason, Rav Yosef did not want Abaye to ask the question because it's a din de rabbanan, and therefore he says, look, save your question. Rabbi said it's okay to do it ayidei nachri. Nachri is a shvus. Amir la'akum is a shvus, and it's a din de rabbanan anyways. It's okay. Levasar achi, Amar li. And then afterwards, Rav Yosef said to me, my boys le'os ve'lemar. What was the question that you wanted to ask Rabbi? Amar le. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, the Tanya, well, we learn in a brayso hazah shvus, v'amir lenachri shvus. Well, so we learn in a brayso that, right, that hazah is a shvus. That if somebody's, let's say, tamei meis, and so you have to sprinkle the mei chatas, right, the water with the ashes of the paraduma on this fellow on day 3 and day 7 of his tumah. So we don't do that on Shabbos, however, right? Midrabanan, it's a shvus. We don't do it on Shabbos, right? And that would be even if there's like a mitzvah, right? So for example, let's say this fellow had to bring his korban pesach and it's the last day of his tumah and it's Shabbos. So we want to, sprinkle this water on him so that he could bring his korban pesach, but there's a shvus that we don't do the hazah on Shabbos, and it's not docha Shabbos even when there's another mitzvah that has to be done. So v'amir lenachri shvus, and amir lenachri, asking a non-Jewish person to do something for you on Shabbos, is also asur midrabanan. So Abaye said that he figured ma'azah shvus ve'nedoches haShabbos, just like hazah is a shvus and it is not docha Shabbos, even when there's a mitzvah to be done like korban pesach. So af amir lenachri shvus ve'nedoches haShabbos. So Abaye says, I figured also the same thing should apply over here. That amir lenachri, asking a non-Jew to bring the water for us, is asur midrabanan, and therefore it should not be permitted, even though it's in the place of a mitzvah to assist in the bris milah. Omerle, Rav Yosef says to Abaye, v'lo shani lach. So Rav Yosef says, there's a difference. There's a difference, Abaye. When it comes to Azaya, your mom is doing something. You're doing a maisa. You're taking this water, you're sprinkling it on the fellow. However, over here, you're not doing anything. You're just asking an Anju to do it for you. Therefore, it's a shvus in the context of a mitzvah where you're not actually doing anything. And therefore, it would be okay to ask an Anju to bring the hot water, since it was to enable a mitzvah and you're not actually doing anything. Very, very interesting. Okay, Dagos Abach says that you can skip the next few words, so why not? Let's just do it. Omerle Rabba bar Rav Chanan la'Abaye. So on the next line, Rabba bar Rav Chanan says to Abaye, Mavoa de izbe tregave ravave kra'abanan lo lehave lo erev lo shituf. Rabba bar Rav Chanan heard about this story, and he says, hey Abaye, that's so weird. A mavoi that has two great rabbis like you and Rabba doesn't have an erev? So random. Omerle, Abaye says, yeah, maybe it's random, but my naivid, what are we going to do? My lav orche. It's not respectful to have Rabba make the erev, go around collecting bread from people. Ana Torina big Yersai, and I'm busy learning, and I don't really feel like spending the time asking people to contribute bread for an erev. And inu lo mashgeche, nobody else really cares. Nobody else is doing it either. So, in the end, we're left without an erev. V'akne luhu pita besila, and if I would tell them that I'm going to contribute every single week some bread, well, kevan de ibau la minoi v'lo efshar leis v'niele batul shituf. Well, if I tell them every week that, yeah, I'll contribute some bread for the erev, well, I might not be able to afford to give them this extra bread every single week, right? If they would come to my house and say, hey, can we have some bread? Well, I might not be able to have extra bread for people every single week. And if they come and ask me and I don't have it, well then the whole erev is going to be kind of no good. So Abaye says for all these reasons, we don't have an Eruv over here. So interestingly, we see over here that Abaye didn't really have so much money. He couldn't necessarily afford an extra loaf of bread for every single Shabbos. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, that he would have to, if you're going to make an Eruv, then you have to be able to really have the food for the Eruv. If somebody who's in the Mavui asked for some of the wine or some of the oil of the Eruv and you don't give it to him, batal shituf, well then the sheet of the Eruv is null and void, because clearly this is not an Eruv that everybody has a part in if when somebody asks for it, you don't give it to him. So Abaye says, look, since I won't be able to afford anyways to be able to give people bread of the Eruv if they ask for it, so I can't really contribute that. So v'niknei lehu mar reviyasa dechala b'chavisa. So then Rabbi Rav Chanan suggested to Abaye, why don't you just designate a revius of vinegar for the Eruv? Now Abaye was in the wine business, as we saw in the last parak of Masechta Brachos, that him and Rava were in the wine business. But Abaye apparently didn't have too much money, whereas Rava was wealthy, I believe. Although it's possible that it's because he married into Rav Chizda's family, but I can't say that for sure. But anyways, so Rabbi Bar Rav Chanan suggested to Abaye, why don't you have a barrel of vinegar in your courtyard, why don't you just designate a revius of vinegar from your barrel to be for the Eruv? And then just, if somebody asks, so then just give him a revius of vinegar. That should be okay. So Abaye says, Tanya in mishtatvim ba'otzer. You can't be mishtatev ba'otzer, meaning you can't just have a collection of stuff and say that part of it is going to be for the Eruv, but not specify a specific amount. Meaning it wouldn't be enough. I can't just say, here's a whole barrel of wine. A revius, a few ounces of it is going to be for the Eruv. You wouldn't be able to do that. Meaning without setting it aside specifically. V'atanya, mishtatvin. But Rabbi Bar Rav Chanan says, one second, but don't we learn in the Brisa that you can do that you can make an Eruv with a collection of stuff? So Amar Rav Oshaya Lokasha, Rav Oshaya says it's no problem. Ha Beishami or Basil. It's machlokas Beishami and Basil about, do you say breira? Can you retroactively, say that something was the case? Meaning, here's an example. Titnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Meiz b'bayis v'lo p'sachim harbe. So if you have a house, and the house has lots of doorways, okay, and in the house is a corpse. Now, kulan tmein. So we say that all of the doorways that, so let's say you have it's a one-room house, and there's, let's say, a door on every side of the house, and the door goes out to outside. So, and there's a dead body in the house. So we say that the thresholds of every single door, if there are vessels on the threshold of every single door, well, all of those kalim are going to be tameh, because we don't know which door the mace is going to go out through. And therefore, since we don't know, we know that the mace is going to have to go out of some door, but we don't know which one. So the vessels that are on the thresholds of all four doors are going to be tameh. Niftach echad, if one of the doors was open, echad man, hu tameh b'chulan tarin. Well, if one of them was open, well then we can assume that the body is going to go out through that doorway, and therefore the vessels that are in that doorway would be tameh, but the vessels in the remaining door thresholds of the doorways would be tahor, because the assumption is that the mace is not going to be going out through those doors. It's going to go out through the open door. Chishev lotzio be'echad man, if he had in mind to take the mace out of one of the specific doors, or b'chalon sheish bo arba al arba, or by way of a window that was 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, matzil al kol psachim. Well, just having that in mind is enough to save the vessels that are in all of the other doorways. Apsachim kulan. Beis Shammai say v'hu shechishev ad shelo yamus hames. Beis Shammai says, yeah, but you have to have that in mind before the person dies, meaning before the person dies and makes everything tameh, you would have had to have already had that thought of would have had to have already planned out which door you want to be taking the mace out of. Whereas Beis Hillel says you can even decide after the person dies which door you plan to take the mace out of, which means that according to Beis Hillel, you can later after the mace dies, you could decide which door you want to take the mace out of, and then retroactively, that will be the one that the mace was supposed to go out of the whole time, and therefore the kalim that are in the thresholds of the other doors remain tahor. So we're going to apply that here as well to the Eruv, and we would say that Beis Hillel would say that theoretically you should be able to take a barrel of wine or of vinegar and designate a revius of it for the Eruv, and then if somebody comes and asks for the Eruv vinegar or whatever, so you can give them that vinegar, and we don't have to assume that maybe somebody already drank the vinegar that was supposed to be for the Eruv. No, you take the revius of vinegar, you give it to the fellow, and memela retroactively that was the revius that was supposed to be for the Eruv. The Gemara continues. How yunuka dishtapich chamime. Okay, so there was another case of a baby who was 8 days old and the hot water spilled out. Amalu Rava said, Nishayle le'ime. Well, I have a good idea. Let's ask the mother of the baby, Itzricha, if she needs hot water, and Nechem le nachri agav ime. And if the mother needs hot water, well then we can just ask a non-Jew to heat up the hot water for the mother. And once the hot water is heated up, we can use it for the baby. Right? And as Rashi points out that we learned in Masechta Shabbos and Daf, it was a Kufchav test or something, that after 7 days you can ask something if the mother asks for something, you can do it by way of a non-Jew. So Rav suggested, let's ask the mother if she needs hot water, and then we can heat up the hot water for her by asking a non-Jew. Amalei Rav Mishashi l'Rava, ime ka'ach l'tamre. So Rav Mishashi said to Rava, yeah, but the mother is already eating cold food. So if she can eat cold food, well then, or she's eating dates, she's eating cold food, well then, why would we be heating up hot water for her if she can just eat cold foods? So Rava said to Rav Mishashi, Amor tunva ba'alma hu dinakadla. I'll just say that she's eating random stuff, meaning, yes, for sure, maybe she's eating cold food, it's not intentional, that's just maybe what she's being given, or she doesn't realize what she's eating. But, we can heat up, if we ask her, do you want hot water? And she says, yes, we can heat up hot water for her by way of a non-Jew, and that would be acceptable. Okay, now another case of a 8-day-old baby whose hot water spilled out. There was another story of a baby that the hot water spilled out. Rava said to them, Panuli mone mi begavre leve noshe ve'ezel ve'esiv hasam ve'ivatiluhu hatzer. So, in order to understand this Gemara, you have to understand the makeup of Rava's hatzer. So Rava had a hatzer. Okay, so you would walk in from Rosh Hashanah, let's say, into his chatzer, and then from his chatzer you would walk into his house. And his house had 2 sections, the Vegavre and the Beinashe. The first section of his house was for the men, and behind that, more inner into the house, was the women's quarters, where the women lived. Okay, fine. So you'd walk in from Rosh Hashanah into this chatzer, and let's say you would turn right into Rava's house. Now, on the left side of the chatzer, there was a doorway. And that doorway led to another chutzner. And in that chutzner was the house where the baby was. So basically, Rava's chutzner had a doorway into another chutzner, which had the house of the baby. Okay, so what Rava suggested is, okay, how about this? Let me clear out any items that I have in the Beit Gavre, in the place in the men's quarters, right? So the first section of his house. So he said, let's clear out all the vessels and let's put it into the inner section of his house where the women live. Okay? And then by doing that, by moving everything into the inner part of his house, he knows that he won't be taking anything out from his from that first house into his chutzner. And then he figures, then what I'll do is I'll be mevatel my chutzner to the other chutzner, right? I'll say to the family with the baby that I'm mevatel my chutzner to you. I'm being mevatel my access to my chutzner to you. You can now use my chutzner, and then you can take the hot water from my chutzner and you can use it. That is what Rava wanted to do, right? So again, yunuka de ish tepuch chamime, there was a baby whose hot water spilled out. Amru Rava, and Rava said to them, Panuli mane mi begavre, please can you clear out the vessels from the first room of the house, levenashe, into the inner part of the house where the women are. The ezel ve'esiv hasam, and I, for the rest of Shabbos, will just stay in the inner part of the house. The ivataluhu hatzer, and I will be mevatel to the next hatzer, my hatzer, so that they can come in and take the hot water. Amle Ravina l'Rava. Ravina says to Rava, "Ve'amar Shmuel, but didn't Shmuel say, Ein bitul rishus mechatzer lechatzer? You can't be mevatel rishus from one chatzer to another chatzer. Certainly not in a situation like this where there's no isser between them." So Amarle, so Rava said to Ravina, Anuk Reb Yochanan, severely, I hold like Reb Yochanan, the Amar yesh bitul rishus mechatzer lechatzer. I hold like Reb Yochanan, who says that you are allowed to be mevatel rishus from one chatzer to another hatzer. And therefore, that's what I'm going to do. So then Ravina says, but if you don't hold like Shmuel, Neisiv mar biduchte, well, if you don't hold like Shmuel, well then, why are you like doing this whole thing where you're going to move all your kalim into the, inner into your house so that you know for sure that you won't carry anything into your chutzner, and you're just going to stay in the inner part of the house the whole Shabbos. So you don't need to do that. If you don't hold like Shmuel anyways, well then Nesim mar b'duchte, just stay where you are. Unavataluhu ledidu, be mevatel your chutzner to the next chutzner so that they can come and take their hot water. Take your hot water. V'nihadru inu unavatlu le, and then once they take the hot water, they'll thank you and give you back your chutzner. Limar deha amar Rav, because after all Rav said mevatlan v'chozin mevatlan, you could be mevatel and then have somebody be mevatel back to you. So Rava says Ana b'ha k'Shmuel severely. So Rava says no. Here I hold like Shmuel. D'amar ein mevatlan v'chozin mevatlan, that you cannot be mevatel once and then have somebody be mevatel back to you. So Rava suggested that in order to get some hot water to this baby, I'll be mevatel my chutzner to the next chutzner so that they can come and take the hot water. Ravina says, but didn't Shmuel say that you're not allowed to do it? He says, look, I don't hold like Shmuel. I hold like Rabbi Yochanan that you're allowed to be mevatel from one chutzner to another. So Ravina says, well, if you don't hold like Shmuel, well, then hold like Rav, who says that you can be mevatel and then be mevatel again, meaning you can be mevatel your chutzner and then they can be mevatel your chutzner back to you. Shmuel says that you're not allowed to do that. You can't be mevatel your chutzner and have somebody be mevatel back to you. But Ravina asks Rav, he says you don't hold like Shmuel anyways. So why don't you just hold like Rav, who says that you can be mevatel your chutzner and then have them be mevatel the chutzner back to you, and then you can use it once again after they give it back to you. So Rava says, no, for this I hold like Shmuel. I hold like Shmuel that ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, but I hold like Rabbi Yochanan when it comes to being mevatel from one chutzner to another chutzner. Okay. Now, Ravina kind of asks this sort of weird question that I don't really understand why it makes sense. I'm not sure. Maybe it's not supposed to make sense. In the end, we reject it. So maybe it's like not. It's okay that maybe it's not 100% in my head. But I don't know. Maybe somebody kind of has a suggestion. Let us know on WhatsApp, Chevra. Hakoponim. Ravina then asks, Rav, he says, V'lav chad taimu, but isn't it all the same reason? And therefore, if you hold like Shmuel, that ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, you're going to have to also hold like Shmuel, that ein mevatlin mechatzer l'chatzer. My time ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin. How come Shmuel says that you're not allowed to be mevatel and then have somebody be mevatel back to you? Lav mishum is not because the cave in the batle, the Rishu say that once you're mevatel your Rishus, istalikle mehachal legamre, you're completely removed from your chutzner v'avle kiben chutzner acheres, and it'll be like you live in a different chutzner. Ve'ein bitul rishus mechatzer l'chutzner, and you're not allowed to be mevatel rishus from one chutzner to a chutzner, meaning to another chutzner. So therefore, if you're mevatel, okay, so I understand the first part, right? The first part is, Shmuel says, ein mevatlin, v'chozin mevatlin, that if you're mevatel your chutzner, somebody can't be mevatel it back to you. How come? Because, well, once you're mevatel your chutzner, you're completely removed from it. And if, in fact, you're completely removed from your chutzner, well, then nobody can give it back to you because you have nothing to do with this chutzner. Okay, I get that. But then he says, and if you're completely removed from your hatzer, well then that means that it's like you're living in a different hatzer, and you're not allowed to be mevatel rishus from one, you're not allowed, and Shmuel says you're not allowed to be mevatel from a hatzer to a hatzer, right? So therefore Ravina wants to say to Rava, well, if you hold like Shmuel, that ein mevatlin v'chozin and mevatlin, then mistama you also hold like Shmuel, that ein mevatlin mechatzer l'chatzer. Okay, I didn't necessarily get that second part, the connection. Why can't you just say the first part, that he holds that you can't give it back to the guy who was mevatel, because once he's mevatel, he's completely removed. I get that, but why do you then have to assume that and also ein mevatlin mechatzer l'chatzer? Why can't you hold like Shmuel that ein mevatlin v'chozin and mevatlin, because it's like you're completely separate, but you are allowed to mevatel mechatzer l'chatzer, right? And after all, Shmuel does say that you are allowed to be mevatel mechatzer l'chatzer in the right when it's osrin uma'arvin mevatlin, right? Shmuel says that when there's the inner chatzer and the outer chatzer, and the inner chatzer didn't make an eruv and the outer chatzer did make an eruv, that the inner one can be mevatlin, right? But if we're saying this whole thing but if you're mevatel, then it's like you're in a different chatzer, well then he wouldn't be allowed to be mevatel. I don't necessarily get it. I don't know, maybe there are ways to answer it. But anyways, we throw out this logic anyways. And Rava says, right, so therefore marnami lo nivatel. Right, so here also, if you're going to hold like Shmuel, that well then you shouldn't be mevatel your chatzer in the first place. So Rava says no. Hasam hainu taima. This is the reason why Shmuel says ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin. It's ki hechid lo lahavi mosid d'rabbanan kechucha v'atzlula, so that the din d'rabbanan doesn't become a joke, right? That I'll be mevatel to you, you'll be mevatel back to me, and it'll become like a big hack and a loophole. He says no. If you're mevatel, and that's that. But it's not connected to ein mevatlin v'chotzer l'chotzer. Right? Rava says, I hold like Rabbi Yochanan that mevatlin mechatzer l'chatzer, but I hold like Shmuel that ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, so that the halachos of the rabbis don't just become a big loophole. Gufa. So we said Rav Amar mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, and Shmuel Amar ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin. Okay, so interesting machlokes. Rav says that you are allowed to be mevatel your rishus and then have somebody be mevatel your chatzer and your rishus in the chatzer and have somebody mevatel it back to you. Shmuel says you can't do this. So lema, let's say Rav and Shmuel beflukta the Rabbanan of Rabbi Eliezer kamifligay. Let's say that the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is like the machlokes between the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer. This was a machlokes that we had in the second parak and Daf Chav Vav. That, and I think it's probably gonna come up some more. I think we're getting into this stage of Masechta Ayruvin, the Eruvi Chatzeris stage, it would seem like, which is pretty interesting because that's probably the most practical for us nowadays. Al Kopanim. So that machlokas was when you have 5 people in a Chatzer and they make an Eruv, but there's the Nudnik, and the Nudnik forgot and he didn't join in the Eruv. And now it's Shabbos and he didn't join in, and everyone's kind of in a pickle because of him, because now nobody can carry because not everybody contributed. So we say that the Nudnik can be mevatel his rishus to the Chatzer, okay, and he doesn't have, he's mevatel his rights to the Chatzer, to everybody else. And then they can, well, because they made an Eruv, they have, they are the only ones with access to the Chatzer, the people who made the Eruv, and that's okay. And now there's machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer said that these people can even carry things in and out of this fellow's house, because when a person's mevatel is rishus to the Chatzer, he's also mevatel rishus to his house. So therefore these fellows can carry from their house into the Chatzer, from the Chatzer into their own houses, but they can also carry from the Chatzer into this fellow's house. So, because Rabbi Eliezer says somebody's mevatel rishus to his Chatzer, he's also mevatel rishus to his house, whereas the Chachamim say that if somebody's mevatel rishus to his Chatzer, he's not mevatel rishus to his house, and therefore these other fellows will be able to carry into the Chatzer, but not into this Nudnik's house. Fine. So we want to say, Chevra, that Shmuel, who says that ein mevatlin v'chozrin mevatlin, that once you're mevatel, it's like you're completely separated from the hatzer, and therefore so nobody can be mevatel it back. So he's going to say, like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that once at least the argument is going to be, he's like Rabbi Eliezer, that when you're mevatel, you're completely removed from it. And since you're completely removed from it, that's why people can go into your house. Whereas Rav, who says that mevatlin, mechozin, mevatlin, that once I'm mevatel, somebody could still be mevatel back to me because I still retain some kind of rights to the hatzer. So here also, when a person is mevatel, his reshus to the hatzer, he still retains rights to his house. That's what we want to argue. Right, so Lema, let's say Rav Shmuel beplukta the Rabban and Rabbi Eliezer kamiflage. The Rav and Shmuel are arguing about the machlokas between the Rabban and Rabbi Eliezer. The Rav, the Amar Kirabbanan, that Rav, who says mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, hold like the Rabbanan, who say that even when he's mevatel his chatzor, he still retains rights to his own house. Ushmuel, and Shmuel says ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, because somebody who's mevatel his reshus to his chatzor, he's completely removed from it. Well, then he says the Amar Rabbi Eliezer, he's like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that somebody's mevatel reshus, he's completely mevatel everything, including his house. Amar lach Rav, so Rav, who says mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, he'll say anadam yafilu Rabbi Eliezer. No, I say my opinion is in line with everybody. Rabbi Eliezer would agree with me that mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin. How come? Because ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer are awesome. The reason why Rabbi Eliezer says that somebody's mevatel reshus to his house, he's also somebody's mevatel reshus to his chatzor, he's also mevatel reshus to his house, because he says mevatel reshus chatzer reshus beis o bitel mishum the bebayis below chatzor lo dari inshe. It's because Rabbi Eliezer holds that a person doesn't live in a house without a chatzor, and if he's mevatel the rights to his chatzor, so Mistami is also mevatel the rights to his house, because you don't have a house without a chatzor. Aval lenin istaluke mi Amar, but in terms of, being so far removed to the extent that he would never be able to get it back, who says? And therefore, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree with me, says Rab, that, even after you're mevatel, you could theoretically get it back. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Anadami afilu krabban. Shmuel says, even though I say, ein mevatlin v'chozin mevatlin, I could still be, right, because when you relinquish the rights to your house, the rights to your chatzor, you're completely removed. I can even be like, the Chacham would even agree with what I am saying. The Chacham say that when you are mevatel reshus to your chatzor, you still retain the rights to your house. Because ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbanan hasam, the reason why the rabbis say over there that when you're mevatel reshus to the chatzor, you retain rights to your house, ela my debatul batul lo udlo batul lo batul, because according to them, I was mevatel the reshus to my chatzor. I wasn't mevatel the reshus to my house, so I retain rights to my house. But that which they were mevatel, that which this person was mevatel, was completely mevatel. Meaning, Shmuel says, look, I understand the Chacham. They say that this fellow was only mevatel the rights to his chatzor. It wasn't mevatel the rights to his house, right? And therefore he retains the rights to his house. But Shmuel is going to say that which he was mevatel, i.e., rights to the chatzor, he was completely mevatel, and there's no getting that back, even according to the Rabbanan. Okay, so we tried to say the machlokas between Rab and Shmuel is like the machlokas between the Rabban and Rabbi Eliezer about when you're mevatel reshus to your chatzor, you also implicitly mevatel reshus to your house, but we didn't really, both Rab and Shmuel are going to argue that everyone agrees with them. Amr of Acha by Chana, Amr of Sheishes, Kitanoi. Okay, so let's say that this machlokas between Rab and Shmuel is like a machlokas Tanoi. Mishenosan reshuso v'hotzi, somebody, a yid, whose mevatel is reshus to the chatzor. Okay, so let's say it's the same situation where you have these 5 people, one person forgot to join the Eruv. So he's mevatel is reshus to the chatzor to everybody else. Okay, great, very nice. V'hotzi, but then he takes something else, then he takes something out of his house into the chatzor. Okay, so much for being mevatel reshus to the chatzor. So bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, aser divrei Rabbi Meir. Whether this fellow took something out of his house into the chatzor on purpose, whether he did it by accident, well, he messed it up. He clearly just showed that he wasn't really mevatel his reshus. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, b'mezid oser, if he does it on purpose, well then it's oser, right? Then he's showing that he didn't really relinquish his rights to the chatzor, but b'shogeg ain't no oser. But if he did it by accident, well then it's fine. We could still treat it as though he did in fact relinquish his rights to the chatzor. So my lab, so let's say that the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is To Marsav Mevatlin v'chozin Mevatlin, Marsav ein Mevatlin v'chozin Mevatlin. Let's say that Rabbi Meir, the reason why when he takes something out from his house to the Rishus, to the Chatzer, whether it's on purpose, whether it's by accident, is because he's not really completely removed from the Chatzer. That when he says that when he's Mevatel his Rishus to the Chatzer, he's not really completely removed from the Chatzer, and therefore, when he takes something out, whether it's B'shogeg, whether it's B'mezid, he's showing that he's not really removed from the Chatzer, and therefore, that is why it messes things up. And that's going to be like Rav, who says that Mevatlin v'chozin Mevatlin, because Rav says that even when you're Mevatel your Rishus, you're not completely removed from it, and therefore somebody can be Mevatel it back to you. And Rabbi Yehuda, who says that, no, when this fellow is Mevatel his Rishus to the Chatzer, well, then he's completely removed from it. And therefore, if he takes something out into the Chatzer by accident, it doesn't mess up his bitul because he's completely removed from it and he's still removed from it. That's like Shmuel who says, Ein Mevatlin v'chozin Mevatlin, because he's completely removed from it. Amar of Acha bar Tachlifa mishmei de Rava, lo. Rav bar Tachlifa says the name of Rava, no, don't match up Rab Meir with Rav and Rab Yehuda with Shmuel. Both Rab Yehuda and Rab Meir hold ein Mevatlin v'chozin Mevatlin like Shmuel. The machlokes in Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda is about, do we fine the person who does it by accident, who takes something out to the Chatzer by accident, because of the person who takes it out on purpose, right? That since if a person were to take something from his house into the Chatzer on purpose, it would mess up the bitul. So do we say that even if he does it by accident, it also messes up the bitul? Marsavar kansu shogeg atu mezid. So Reb Meir says, yes, we do in fact, fine somebody who takes something out to his Chatzer, even b'shogeg, because of on account of the person who would do it b'mezid. Marsavar lo kansu shogeg atu mezid. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we don't make this knas, and if somebody takes something out to the Chatzer by accident, it doesn't mess up the bitul. Rav Ashi Amar Rav Shmuel Plukta to Rabbi Eliezer Rabban Komiflage. Rav Ashi goes back to the original thing that we wanted to say, that the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel lines up with the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan about if you're Mevatel Rishus to your Chatzer, you're also Mevatel Rishus to your house. Okay, fine. Amar Rabbi Gamliel says, Rabbi Gamliel, Maise b'tzduki echad shayadari manu. So back to our Mishnah from Samach, what was it? Samach Aleph Mud Beis. Yeah. So our Mishnah from Samach Aleph Mud Beis, we're finally moving on. And we said in the Mishnah that Rabbi Gamliel said that there was a story with the Tziduki who lived with us in our Chatzer, and Rabbi Gamliel said that his father, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, said that right after Shabbos starts, we should run into the Chatzer and, bring something there and make a chazaka, or into the Mavoi and make a chazaka there before the Tziduki does and undoes our Eruv that we made. So Tziduki mandachar shmei. So the Gemara asks, who said anything about a Tziduki? We were talking about the Mishnayos about if you have a non-Jew living in your Chatzer, if you have Kusim, people who don't believe in Eruvs living in your Chatzer. And then Rabbi Gamliel gives us a story about a Tzduki. Tzduki's a Jew. Who said anything about a Tzduki? So the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is missing a few words. This is what it means. Tzduki areu kinachri, that a Tziduki is treated, at least for Ayruvin, like a non-Jew. Rabbi Gamliel says, Tziduki eino kinachri. Tzduki is not like a non-Jew. And while a non-Jew cannot be Mevatel his Chatzer, a Tzduki can be Mevatel his Chatzer. Rabbi Gamliel said, Maise b'Tzduki echad, there was a story with the Tzduki, Sha'edari manu b'Mavi b'Yerushalayim, who lived with us in a Mavui in Jerusalem. V'amar lanu Abba, and my father, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, said, Maru v'otziu es hakelim l'Mavui, go and quickly bring things out to the Mavui once Shabbos begins, ad shelo yotzi ve'asar lechem, before this Tziduki brings things out into the Mavui, and clearly shows that he wasn't serious about being Mevatel his Rishus, and then he will basically mess up the Shituf Mevos that we did. The assumption being that once you take something into the Mavui, make some kind of a chazaka on Shabbos, that would be enough to prevent the Tziduki from uprooting our Eruv and undermining our Eruv, even if he takes things into there on Shabbos. Okay. V'atanya, and we learn in a brisa, hadar mana im nachri tzduki uvaisusi, somebody who lives with a non-Jew or a tzduki or a baisusi, are elu osun alav, they would be be oser on the people who live in the hatzer or the mavui. They would have to make a schirus, and we see that tzduki is being included with a non-Jew. And then the brisa continues and says that there was a story with a tzduki that lived with Rabbi Gamliel in a mavi b'Yerushalayim. Rabbi Gamliel said Levanov to his children, Banai, my children, Maru v'otziu ma'ashatem motziin v'achnisu ma'ashatem machnisin, go and take out that which you take out and bring in that which you bring in. Ad shelo yotzi atoy v'azeh ve'yoser aleichem sharibita v'shusu lachem divrei Reb Meir. Right, go and bring in things, right? Basically make a chazaka there quickly before this tzeduki makes takes anything out to this mavui. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda b'lashon acheres, Rabbi Yehuda says slightly different. Maru v'asu tzorchechem b'mavui ad shelo techshach ve'aser aleichem. Go and quickly do your needs in the mavui before Shabbos, right? Before it gets dark, and it will become asur upon you. I hope the Gemara is going to talk about this a little bit more, but Rabbi Yehuda disagreed slightly with exactly what happened, and instead he said that what Rabbi Gamliel suggested was that they go out and actually do something before Shabbos there, make some kind of a kinyan or something before Shabbos, so that this tzeduk would be unable to mess things up. Alright, that was Daf Samches of Masechta Ayruvin. I hope you all enjoyed it. Let's go over some of the things that we learned. We talked about Amira La'akum when it comes to a Shvus, and it is a mitzvah. Or really, it's a question of, so I guess Amira La'akum, when it comes to Shvus, so in this case it's Ayruvin, and also Amira La'akum is Midrabanan, Ayruvin is Midrabanan, and there's a mitzvah, such as if we want to get hot water, so we could bathe this baby before and after the bris. So we said essentially that if you're going to do a ma'aseh, so for example, to sprinkle a for para aduma, right, mechatas on somebody, which is you're actually doing something, so that would not be allowed, even if it's to allow him to bring his korban pesach. Whereas if there's no ma'aseh, such as over here, you're just doing amir l'nochri, that would be acceptable. Rava gives a different suggestion, which is actually what you can do is you can do amira l'nochri to get water for the hot water for the mother, and then once it's for the mother, you can use it for the baby as well. We talked about breira by an eruv, right? Rabbi Bar of Chanan suggested to Abaye, why don't you just put a barrel of vinegar out in your chutzner, and that will be for the eruv, and then just designate a revius of vinegar from the barrel, that would be for the eruv. And if ever anybody comes and asks for part of the eruv, you could just give him the revius from the barrel. So Rabbi Rav Chanan suggests that. Abai seemed to not be too excited about it, but then we showed how this concept of breira really lines up to a machlokes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whereas Beis Hillel seems to say that breira, right, retroactively determining something would be acceptable. We talked about being mevatel from a rishus to a rishus. So Shmuel says you're not allowed to, whereas Rabbi Yochanan says that you would be allowed to. And then we got into the sugya of, can you be mevatel v'chos or mevatel? Once one person is mevatel as rishus, can you be mevatel it back to him? Right? Can you be mevatel back to him? Rav says yes, sure, no problem. Shmuel says no, you may not. And Rav explained that the reason why Shmuel says that you may not is so that the halacha of the chacham does not look like a joke, that we're going to have people just be mevatel their shus and then be mevatel back. It just looks like a big loophole. So therefore, that is why we are not mevatel v'chos or mevatel. Chevra, I hope you enjoyed Daf Samches. Peace out.